Customer success team office hours. Today we have a real interesting one for you. We have Multi-AZ with Z House, which is actually kind of funny that Z House is doing Multi-AZ. I just thought about that. You can follow him on Twitter at the most confusing Twitter handle that might ever exist at underscore VMZ underscore. Um, Very smart guy, very capable. Multi-AZ is a very hot topic that's come around lately since we started offering it about, I guess, a month, maybe two ago. Um, and we really wanted to go through a lot of its features, how it's set up, what all of the caveats are, and just kind of give some good in-depth information behind it. So again, Z House is going to be doing this. So he's a customer success member in our team. We also have some other members of the customer success team available here for questions. Again, you can always ask questions in the chat. But with that, I'm going to let Z run with it. Introduce yourself there, Z.
All right, thanks everybody. As Matt said, my name is Z House. Yeah, it's a little confusing, especially with the brand new Twitter handle that I just created. So apologies for that. We may have to change it. But as Matt said, we're going to be doing a little demo hour on multi-AZ or stretch clusters in the on-prem world. So yeah, I'm on Matt's team. But with that, we'll just dive right into it. So first, at the most basic, it's a stretch cluster, or what I believe used to be called like a geo cluster. So when we deploy it, you will end up with work or hosts in two different availability zones that reside in the Amazon regions, and then there's a third witness host that is automatically placed in another in a in a third region automatically, or sorry, in a third availability zone automatically in that region. So that gives you, and then the storage is replicated by VCN synchronously, so for synchronous writes. With that, the first process, if you guys are familiar with it, is actually creating an SDDC. It's very similar to the normal processes you would go through if you've already gone through and done a OneNode or a sample or anything like that. First thing we do, you'll notice the multi-host and then just a little stretch cluster button. Really, at the end of the day, that's all that you have to do. You get an option. The minimum node count is 6. So what we'll be demoing here is something that's not available. It's just a 2-node. It's just really for demo purposes. So the minimum node count when you go through and you deploy is 6 physical nodes. You see it'll give you the total capacity, 12 sockets, the X amount of cores, and just under 65 terabytes of raw storage capacity.
It also might be worth noting right here, Z, too, as well, that when you add hosts to this, it has to go in multiples of 2. You can't just add one. Is that correct?
Exactly. So when you the initial is 6, and so as you can see from the drop down, you go from 2, 4, 6, 8, and go 10. Minimum host count is 6. The maximum host count is 28. And so when you add a host, it would be adding a host in each availability zone. So
And another point here, I think, is worthy to touch upon, just because this comes up a lot, is if you're using this properly, do you really have 6 nodes of capacity, or is that more 3 nodes of capacity, or how can you architect that out? Do you think?
that would really depend. So some customers, actually, a customer had a question just the other day that came in, and they wanted to use stretch clusters, but they wanted the ability to keep workloads in one availability zone. So maybe that they have application availability or some type of clustering built in at the application layer. So when if and when an availability zone went down, they did not want that workload to restart in the other one. So not only is that going to save compute resources, but there's also the replication bandwidth. So with the storage policies and vSAN, we can actually control that, and that'll be something that we'll demo is keeping a workload in one particular availability zone.
So along those lines, though, I mean, you could, in theory, have your primary in one side and maybe run some test dev or something in another side, but there'd be a manual process to kind of shut down those test dev. I think what as you touched upon, I think one of the key points is you're really protecting against an availability zone. So if you fill this all 6 nodes up, and AWS drops an availability zone, you didn't really save yourself anything, right?
Correct. So this is high availability. This is not DR.
And this is a time where we can pimp a blog here. I think I've written a blog on vcloud.matt.com. I got to get my pitches in when I can, talking about that specific difference that Z just went over. Is that this is availability, not DR, and there is a definite difference, and we can go over that another time. But we'll let Z continue stepping us through this.
Exactly. So, all right. So we've gone through. We've picked our creative host, our SDDC name, our minimum hosts, the account linking. You go through and you need to tie it to an AWS account. And then the one caveat or the one main difference, other than the fact that we're deploying a multi-AZ SDDC, is when you pick this, you actually need to pick two availability zones. And apologies, I didn't clean up my VPC before I did this. So you can see we have we have 2A and 2B for a couple of /20s. So it will not let you, obviously you can see that it's not gonna let you click next. It's also not gonna let you click next if you try to do 3. Either give it a managed side or you could leave it blank for the default. And then you click on deploy. And roughly about 2 hours or so on the other end of that, you would have your multi-AZ SDDC. So as one of our other CSAs we have on the team, Michael said, it's kind of like a cooking show. So we put that into the oven and then we reach to another oven, and here's our SDDC. So as you can see, it's 2 hosts. You do get the combined capacity and the dashboard. So we have 2 hosts for the capacity, CPU, memory, and storage. But as we were talking about earlier, that's not really, if you were to fill both of those hosts up and there was an AZ failure or something that caused an event, things are either going to run at a degraded performance level or they're not going to run at all. With that, so I've gone through and I've done a little bit of pre-configuration here. We've got our management VPN, our compute VPN, a couple of networks, and a couple of VMs set up to do some testing. So if we come over here and actually log into our virtual center, we can see exactly what that looks like. So we have our cluster. This node here is our witness host, and that automatically gets placed. So since we deployed into Oregon, where there's only 3 availability zones, host number 1, we can see is in 2A. Host number 2 is in 2B. So by default, that means that our witness host is in 2C. And might also be a good point to know that my 2A, B, and C are probably different from Matt's and from everybody else's, as those are randomized from account to account, customer to customer. So with that, we have a couple of test VMs. Actually, let's go back. Let's talk about the storage policies that we're talking about on keeping hosts in particular availability zones or configuring them to be stretched for that high availability. So I've gone through and I've created a couple of very creatively named storage policies. 2A, so this one here is going to keep everything on our preferred stretch cluster. We'll take a look at the vSAN settings. As this is only a 2-node, there is no failures to tolerate, so there's no data redundancy because there's only 1 node in each availability zone. So that would keep any VM that's assigned this policy, the data would only reside in availability zone 2A. Same thing in 2B, except for we're now on the non-preferred stretch cluster side. And I've also created a stretched. So we have dual site mirroring. Again, no data redundancy in the availability zone, but because that data is being synchronously written across the availability zones, if one AZ were to go down, that copy is also there.
Yeah, and it's worth to note that, as you touched upon, when the customer deploys, this will have a different failures to tolerate in there, right? It'll have
Exactly. So by default, I believe when a production SDDC is deployed, I'm pretty sure we either default to RAID 1 or RAID 5. So a failure is to tolerate of 1. But yeah, so your settings would be different. I can set those settings, but we wouldn't be able to deploy anything because there's no compliant storage behind it.
Yeah, and you can ultimately, the customer can decide exactly like you did. If you don't want any site redundancy on the one side, you're going to use it on the other side, or you want no redundancy at all, or well, I guess you wouldn't want that in AZ, but or you can have it, failures to tolerate 2, I guess would be the probably the max you could have right now. But you could this is all configurable by the customer.
Exactly. So those are our storage policies. So let's take a look at some of the vSAN settings here. It kind of ties this back. So we can look at our fault domains, and that's how we would control where data would reside, and we can see the name. So part of the process of the SDC being deployed, we match the name of the availability zone that corresponds to your account, and we can see we have one host in each. And so the little star is showing that that is our preferred fault domain. If we come back, so I do have a couple of also creatively named VMs.
And just to quickly touch upon that last one, so that's automatically created those fault domains.
Correct.
By VMC.
Correct. There would be no. You wouldn't be able to rename it. You wouldn't be able to change it. You would be able to change your preferred. So, yep. So if we come down, if we look, just to kind of show, and if you're not familiar with vSAN, so a lot of this stuff here may be new to you, but just kind of showing exactly, that it's not a sleight of hand on the back end. I can show you exactly where this data resides. Let me minimize these to make it a little easier here. So we have our 2A VM, which, as everybody can probably guess, is going to be pinned to the 2A side. So we can see the components. We have our disk, our swap object, and then our home. They're all in the 2A domain. And if we look at it, we can see what host it's on, which is 68, which is also corresponding to 2A. So that's the only place that this data lives is on this particular host. It's not replicated. And since we only have a single host, there's no failures to tolerate. 2B looks the same. We can show it here real quick. 84, again, just knowing that that's our host that corresponds to AZ2B, all the same components. And if we come over, we look at the stretched one, we can see that we have the same objects, our swap, our home, and our disk, but now these components are synchronized between the two AZs. So if my 2-node cluster, if you will, if host 68 goes down, that VM will be restarted on 84, and there's a copy of that data that lives there. So on the back end, from what you're actually seeing, so I've also logged into our Amazon account. So if we flip over, imagine some people are probably wondering, because I know this was one of the things that I was wondering, is how does the networking work? So I know that we've done some intro videos on these, and you can go back and take a look at that. But at a high level, there's a CGW, or a compute gateway, which is an NSX ESG ultimately. We can see those here in the compute resource pool. They are in HA mode, so there's 2 of them. So all the compute traffic, so any of this VM here, if we open this guy up, of course. So this VM has network connectivity. It's on the 2A side. So that's going to flow through the CGW, through the IGW in the AWS portion, and then out to the internet. So what would happen if, an availability zone goes down, or there's some type of failure? So out of the box, your customers would not have the access to do this. But for demo purposes, I've been able to grant myself access to actually vMotion these interfaces, um, or these ESGs to the other host. So let's kick that off here. Before we do that, let's take a look here. I'll show you the routing table, not in the right view. So we can see this is my compute network that I set up, and we can see it's currently going through ENI 1E4F. So if we bounce back to here, if we take a look at our network interfaces, scan over a little bit so we can see 1E4F, which corresponds, everything lines up. Again, I'm not a magician here on the back end. Everything lines up to 2A. So that's where this ESG currently lives. Again, they're in a pair. Let's verify that we're on 68, which again goes to 2A. So let's move these guys over. And this is for demo purposes only. I'll just repeat that again so that we don't get a flood of questions asking why can't I do this in my environment.
So effectively, what you're doing is is simulating the move of all the networking from one AZ to another.
Exactly. So these guys have moved, and it's actually so fast that now if we go back to the routing table, we're looking for 986A. I've tried to actually capture it moving, but my alt tabs are not on point. So it's route table, routes. We can see that now we're going through 96A, which again corresponds to US West 2B. So now our traffic is going through. So if there was an AZ failure, this is just one way of kind of showing what would happen, or if there was something wrong with the management components where HA kicked in and ended up restarting these components on the other side of the stretch cluster. This is exactly what would happen. This is how your traffic would remain intact. I can show a little demo here. Give me 1 second. Not sure why this is giving me fits here. All right, so I don't think this is going to work. All right, I can do it another way here. Sorry for the improvisation here. So we would ping 72.20.10.3 source VLAN 191. They're all disconnected. All right. Find one that's connected here. Connected. This should work. Why is this not working? Oh.
So just in case anybody's wondering, this is a live demo.
This is a live demo. Very live, obviously. Give me 1 second here to figure out something is missing, obviously.
And while he's looking into that, so the one thing to kind of bear in mind about these AZs is it's going to be vSphere HA that takes over here when we drop an AZ. So all of the actions, like the one where Z showed the moving of the edge gateways and stuff like that, that will automatically occur in the event of something failing, which is kind of the main appeal of the multi-AZ cluster.
Correct. Yeah. So and going back to while it's high availability and it's not DR. So from that standpoint, it just gives you there's automation. So it's not like DR as a service where you have to push a button to actually fail over your workloads. It's vSphere HA that kicks in. Um, all right, enable this guy here. I may need to share something else. I don't know how that's going to work out.
It's also worth mentioning that there are HA rules to determine which comes up first, which are currently inaccessible for customers who are looking at offering that functionality. But currently, what happens first is our management stuff fails over first, so that we can restore our management as quickly as possible for everybody to get in and figure out kind of what happened and how to bring their applications back online.
Correct. So let's take a look at 2A, and unless that's IP change, nope, it's there. We're still here, right? Ping. Get there. Why can't I? Or am I just being impatient? Okay, well, we'll go the other way then. And we're actually going to just open up an SSH session because this is going to end up dying. All right, so ping, let me do. All right, so we're going on-prem. Let's see if we can resize these here. Make it a little easier to see. So let's go back and vMotion these. So our CGWs are on the B side now. Migrate these back to A. And normally it's also worth noting that so while this is for demo purposes, so the components would stay together, that you wouldn't end up with the CGWs in one side and the rest of the management stack in the other, or anything split like that. This is really just to kind of show exactly how the functionality would work and what would happen if there was a failure. And obviously, if there was a failure and the services had to restart, this would not be the case. But if there was a predictive failure and everything vMotion from one AZ to another, this is what it would look like. So we come back to our route table here. Can't quite tell. I think these guys are done. Yep. So 96A, I think the other one was 1F, 1E. Yep, 1E, 4F. So now we're back to the other side. So this is interesting. So in my previous test, when I was setting up for this, we lost 2 packets. Looks like there was actually some more lost there. But obviously there's a routing table that needs to be updated so that it knows the path out, not only from VMC, but out through your AWS account. Same thing. So we can also show, on our stretched VM, we can vMotion this VM between the two, since there's a copy of the data on both sides. I think, let's see here. Okay, so it's currently on 84. Move it back. And another thing to note, so you may ask, why don't I just do 2 SDDCs? Why can't I do this with 2 different SDDCs, and, kind of do your own stretch clustering? So there's so NSX is layering across the top of both of those. So we're actually stretching the network between the two different availability zones in Oregon to give you that mobility across the two. Um, take a break. Do we have any questions coming in?
We have no questions yet. Again, anybody can post questions in the chat, or you can tweet at me at vcloudmad or at z at underscore underscore vmz underscore underscore. Um,
Um,
and we can get around to it. Or yeah, you just ask us any questions, even if you're watching the recording or anything like that. Feel free. There's a lot of, as Z touched upon, there's a lot of complexity under the covers for how this works. But that's pretty much abstracted from everybody. I mean, we handle the creation of the clusters, the networks, the data stores, all that stuff. So it was as easy to set up this as it was to check that box that Z showed earlier. Now, we should maybe, Z, do you maybe want to talk about some of the caveats that go along with this? Because, one of the concerns that I have, or one of the things that I've seen happening is a lot of people go, well, why would I want to do that all the time?
yeah. Yeah, so definitely that's another question. If this is literally as easy as checking a box, why wouldn't I do that? So there's obviously the cost, right? So there is an associated cost with it, not only from the service cost, the service being VMware Cloud on AWS, but there's also a replication. So there's cross AZ charges. So we are doing synchronous writes. So when the storage policy is there and in place to be synchronized, there's a charge. So if you have a super aggressive database or something like that has a high change rate, there is going to be some incurred charges there.
Yeah, so, and I think right now that's charged at what, 1 cent a gig?
I believe so. It's those cross AZ charges are whatever the standard Amazon rates are. And then as far as calculating that, so if you have a say 100 gig database, I believe that we're we're kind of targeting it's like 1.2 or 1.3, so it's not just a straight 100 gigs, since there's some additional communication that's happening there as well to make sure that everything's being written appropriately.
Yeah, and then as you touched upon too, there is an additional cost for this cluster type from us. So there is, and I'm not exactly sure what that premium is, but there is a premium charged for this over and above just a standard SDDC.
Yeah, and so yeah, I don't know. I didn't know if we want to touch on the cost aspect of it, but it is 10% over the base rates, and that's just if you were to go out and do an on-demand, or anything like that, if you're not negotiating a rate, that's it's just a 10% upcharge on top of a regular single AZ SDDC.
Yeah, so I'm like I said, but if availability is kind of what you're looking after, I guess it's a nominal fee when you look at it from that perspective. But I also think that there is some architectural type considerations you should make around where the layout is of your applications if you span both. So can maybe go into like so what are some of the application architectures that would kind of work well, you think in this type of scenario?
That's probably a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I mean, so some of the things to think about it. I mean, some of the basics, right? So you wouldn't want your database living on one side and your application tier living on the other. Not only for the cross AZ charges, but just kind of the locality of it. The latency between the two is very low. It's just the normal AZ to AZ inside of Amazon. It would really be making sure um, that I mean, just kind of planning ahead for the cost, right? So the costs are going to be variable. So with kind of a traditional fixed node or a four node single AZ SDDC, there's always going to be the egress charge going out. So anything that goes out either to the internet or over VPN over your direct connect, there's going to be that. But I mean, everything else is fairly fixed. With this, so not only do you have the egress charge, which is also again going to be most likely variable from month to month, unless you're moving just a fixed amount of data, but then you also have the cross AZ charge that's going to be there as well.
I just wanted to jump in as Michael. Been listening, so thanks. Great. But in terms of costs, I think there are a couple of costs that we're not really adequately factoring in, and those are around the duplication. In order to get that availability in both zones, there are a couple of things that have to be duplicated. So one is storage. So essentially, you're storing every object multiple times. It's got to be stored on both sites. So you could be consuming more storage by going to multi-AZ versus single AZ. And the other thing is, as Matt talked about earlier, I sort of referred to the, you really have three hosts or 6 hosts kind of thing. If you really are planning for that full availability and that you're going to be able to run at the same capacity when in case of a failure of an AZ, then effectively your capacity is half of what you're paying for. So if you have 6 hosts, 3 of them are basically there in case of disaster. Doesn't mean that you can't use them, but you have to understand that if in order to get that actual availability, you have to have workloads that you can afford to lose in case of a disaster. So either be using it for excess capacity when there is no disaster, which will be most of the time, but to really accommodate that availability, you need to basically have double the capacity that you would for a single AZ.
Definitely, and particularly on the storage side. So if you're not familiar with vSAN policies and how that would work, so if we go back and we take a look here, what we have. Oh, that's not great. I'll do this. So my 1 photon VM, it's 10 gigs in size. There's no availability. So you can see right here, it's gonna, a 100 gig disk is gonna consume 100 gigs of storage. If we were to do RAID 1, 100 gig would be 2. But if we were to come over and do RAID 1 across, right? So I mean, we're still consuming, and depending on your storage setting, you could, I mean, that could, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but that could actually go up to 400 gigs depending on your storage policies.
Yeah, in terms of the actual cluster usage, if you're spanning it across both.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Michael, brought up a very good point. I don't remember asking him a question, but it's good that he popped in.
If I waited for you to ask me a question, I'd be sitting here quiet the whole time, and that's just not my style.
That's true. But it's a very good point. Now, and to the question I kind of asked Z a little bit earlier. Now, again, we've been talking a lot about caveats here, but say you have, and I hate this term because I don't agree with it being, but for a legacy application, right? It's an application that resides on a single, server, a single VM that doesn't have any native inbuilt ability to be highly available. This is an extremely good use case for it. So we always talk, a lot of times now about cloud native apps and application architectures that have built-in availability within their application that's able to detect a node going down or whatever else going down, that they can automatically do this. But there is a lot of applications out there that aren't architected that way and can't be updated to architect that way. And this is a way of offering an increased level of availability just being within a VM.
Yeah, and to that point, Matt, I think really what's happening is, so it's shifting the cost. So as you said, you can code that into the application, whether it's a cloud native or just some kind of in-house app. But there's going to be a cost. So maybe your current application developers don't have that skill set, so you're gonna have to outsource it or bring somebody new in. And obviously there's a cost that's associated with this. So it's kind of a decision. Do you want to, where do you want to invest? This, as we pointed out, is very easy. I think the upcharge on it is pretty nominal for what you're getting, especially considering how difficult this is to do in the on-prem world. So are you gonna, is that gonna be a 10% upcharge to have your app rewritten to handle that availability, or is it gonna be more than that?
Yeah, and I think it's a very valid point, and I think over and above that, I think, and from my experience, and maybe some people's differ, and you can let us know in the chat, or you guys can let me know in the voice here, is I know a lot of companies that have this application that nobody knows how it works anymore. Right? They have it does something critical. It was designed 5-10 years ago, and it needs to be up. It needs to be very highly available. But damn if anybody knows how it works. This is a really, really good use case for that. So, like I said, we're kind of bringing in a lot of the caveats, but there is a lot of benefit to this as well.
Yeah. And I mean, it it probably goes without saying, but I think it needs to be reinforced. Like I touched on just a second ago, this is something that's been around for a while. So either geo clusters, metro clusters, stretch clusters, whatever terminology you want to do, but it's very difficult and very costly to do on-prem. So there's usually a 50 to 100-mile radius where the data centers need to be located, which is sometimes not the case. Circuits and latency, the hardware and the gear and everything to be able to facilitate this kind of technology. And I mean, here it's literally checking a box for a stretch cluster.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon this, Z, when you went over the networking stuff, and I think maybe some people didn't quite, you know, comprehend the magnitude of what you were showing. But that to me, in my experience, is a lot of times with a stretch cluster in on-prem worlds, is the layer two extension is always a very very difficult thing for it. So usually we'd always get 90% done with the customer talking about stretch cluster, and then we bring up, well, we usually bring up layer two first, but they'd say, oh, well, I don't know how we're going to do that.
Yep.
And we just make that happen for you.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, so back in the day, maybe 7, 8 years ago, it was a hardware layer two extension. So NSX has made that easier, which I think has helped kind of increase the penetration of these types of on-prem environments by making the network portion easier. But just the the physical hardware cost is still pretty steep.
So yeah, I think just to add, you guys are making absolutely fantastic points, and obviously I didn't mean to diminish it when I was raising the cost concerns. I think it's fantastic that we offer this, because there are a lot of cases where you can basically with a click of a box enable high availability that you could never do almost any other way before without spending huge amounts of money. I just wanted to be clear, there are some costs, and you should understand those costs, but often those costs are minimal compared to the additional availability that they provide.
Yeah.
No, and I think your points were perfectly valid, Michael. And I think it's to the vein, and this is why I wrote a blog article about this, and I think other members of our teams have, and other members of other teams all over the place have wrote about it. Is we just have an overwhelming amount of clients that just say, "Well, I want to check that box," right, without really kind of thinking about why. They just see it as more availability, but which it is. However, it depends on a lot of stuff. So, and that's where our team comes in handy, is we can chat through these scenarios with you, and if this fits for you, it fits for you, and it's a really cool, really useful solution on the right use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually one of those people who did also write another blog around these type of things. Mine wasn't specifically talking about the multi-AZ solution, but more trying to sort of help people understand the difference between availability and recoverability, and how to plan for what type of scenarios you want to protect from, because there's always going to be a scenario that you can't plan for, or that you choose not to plan for, because the cost for planning for it versus the likelihood of it occurring are simply not business, they're not commercially viable, right? So every business has to make decisions, and they should think about those, because it's important to their business. If you're operating in a hurricane zone, you may need to plan for that because it's critical to your business. But you may not need to plan for wildfires or something, or you may not need to plan for other scenarios. So it's really about thinking, what scenarios do you plan for, and then how are you mitigating that, and make sure that you have a plan in place. And multi-AZ is an availability construct. It gives you protection against a failure of an AZ, but it doesn't protect you against every scenario. And so that's why I always like to bring up the point again. And I know we've probably mentioned it a few times already on this session, but you still need to have protection for the other scenarios, such as backups, and really backups, regular backups that are tested, and a restore procedure to be able to bring workloads back from those backups is really critical, because they cover almost every scenario, assuming that you're at least storing them off-site. Corruption, loss of a site, really, it's just a question of how long it takes you to recover that data. But they really give you that fail-safe in a lot of cases that nothing else can provide the equivalent of. So, availability through multi-AZ gives you that first level of defense to prevent you from going down in the first place. But in case it does happen, you still need to have the additional levels. And so, I encourage also reading the blog that I put together, or I'm sure there are lots of resources that help you cover your disaster recovery plan for your organization.
I apologize, Michael. We've already made our one blog pitch for the day.
Good thing I
No.
snuck it in there.
Well, did you want to mention where that is, because it is an excellent article to read through.
Yeah, it's actually on the VMware cloud.vmware.com/blog site, or is it blogs.vmware.com/cloud? Actually, I think it is. But if you go to VMware site and look for blogs, it's up there. And I believe it's been tweeted from all of our accounts. So if you're following Matt's instructions to follow us all on Twitter, then you should be able to search it for there too.
Yeah, and so on the DR and the recovery sense, right? So high availability is not a backup. DR is not a backup. It's the protection in depth. So with that, one of the questions we may, I don't know if somebody is asked or just not aware of it. So DR as a service, which is an add-on offering for this, is also compatible with Multi-AZ. So you could still protect your on-prem workloads to this SDDC, or vice versa. You could use SRM, which is what DR as a service is based on, to protect those workloads from here back to your on-prem environment. And then of course backups, right? So having high availability in DR as well as a backup would give you those three layers.
Absolutely. So, was there anything else you wanted to cover here with the Multi-AZ talk?
No, I think that really what I kind of wanted to show, and it was also a very good learning experience for myself, because I had some questions that were unanswered before I came into this, and really seeing how the route tables are updated on the Amazon side, and seeing how the ENIs or everything are consumed, and from that standpoint, that's definitely something that when you deploy this on your own, you can see that in your environment. So just kind of understanding that connectivity, and what that connectivity, that interruption would look like when things are moving back and forth. Those are really the things that I wanted to point out and show, and just kind of give everybody the visibility and kind of a look at it to see what they were actually getting.
No, I think that was a fantastic cover of it. I think I appreciate Michael jumping in as well, as much as I give him grief around the discussion around it, because, like I said, it's an important topic to consider. And now that everybody has seen kind of how it's configured, how it's created, and all of the workings under the covers, I think I can get a better understanding of it. And with that said, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. VMworld is next week, and we're going to try to do some streaming from the floor. We're going to see how that works. Paige, are you still on the call here?
Yes, I am.
Well, here is your chance to sell your session. So Paige is going to be. She was it last week? 2 weeks ago. You did the app defense.
I think it was 2. But
2
yeah,
weeks ago.
so I will be all over VMworld, but I have one session with the app defense customers I've been working with, and it's just a panel session to go over what they've seen, what they found most valuable, and some tips for customers who are thinking about app defense. We also have a special guest joining Tom Korn's keynote session about securities, which was one of the customers I worked with. And that's Tuesday from 1 to 2. And my session is on Tuesday from 4 to 5.
Excellent. Highly recommend you check those out. App defense is definitely something that is of keen interest to a lot of people. And you get to see Paige live presenting, which is always fantastic. I have a session with perhaps the world's best time slot of Thursday at 1:30. So those that are awake after the VMworld party and haven't flown home yet, feel free to join me. I'm going to be presenting with a compatriot of mine, Andrea Silviero, on VMware Cloud on AWS, the migration venture. So going through a lot of migration scenarios. Z and Michael and a good amount of our team are also going to be all around VMworld. We have a number of customer meetings. We also have the cloud. It's called a Cloud City booth that's going to be on the show floor that I am going to be attending some sessions. Are any of you guys doing those as well?
I haven't had a chance to take a look at my schedule yet.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
on that.
I think I was, but they changed things around, so I'm not quite sure when I'll be there, but hopefully
So anyway,
at some point.
either way, that'll be a good place to catch some members of our team. I know, I think even Al is doing a session, who is our vice president in charge of customer success. So definitely drop by the Cloud City booth in the VMware exhibition. Feel free, like I keep, suggesting everybody follow us on Twitter and throw a tweet at us. And I'm sure, if you have any questions or just want to get together and chat about VMC, we can try to fit you in. But it's going to be a busy week. It's going to be an exciting week. There's going to be some really cool announcements coming for VMware Cloud next week as well as probably some around App Defense and a whole bunch of stuff. So this is kind of the keen week to be around VMworld, and we're going to try to get as much information as we can. And like I said, perhaps stream. We will see how it goes. But with that, if there's no questions, I haven't seen any questions in the chat or on Twitter, we can probably call it a little bit early this week. I want to say thank you to Z for coming out and presenting on this topic for us and giving us a real in-depth look at Multi-AZ. Another thing of note that I want to add is we started to put all of these recorded sessions onto a YouTube, which is actually listed on the Twitch page just at the bottom. You click on the link for the VMC CS YouTube, and you can actually watch these on demand later on. They only reside on Twitch for 15 days, so if you kind of want to come back when you get around to actually setting up an AZ cluster and want to see some of what we went through, just click that link and check us out there. Any closing remarks, Z? I'll let you kind of take us out.
No, I'm good. Thank everybody for your time, and look forward to talking to you.
All right. Well, so we'll hopefully see everybody next week. If we're not on next week, we will be on definitely the week after. So just keep an eye on our events page, and thank you for tuning in, and we'll see everybody soon. Thanks.